A pervasive underlying tone exists in many religious circles when we talk about being a Christian or following Jesus. And this tone is a tone of conformity and compliance. Mind you, not when it comes to so-called fighting for one's beliefs in a secular society or standing on one's religious principles, often meaning doctrine or dogma, usually taking form in heated debates in congregations and outside in the church parking lot. But the conformity and compliance, plays out in a different way. A well-behaved, sit still, sit down, mind your manners, docile compliance. It's a message of follow the rules and don't question the rules. A blind acceptance of what we're told God's will and ways are, often extended to mean the will and ways of any authority figure, elder, leader, or system which is deemed a valid authority. Especially when that authority is entangled in our faith community, whether that entanglement is appropriate or not. And in contrast, rebellion is most commonly framed within a construct of sin. Rebellion is thought of as purely bad. The devil rebelled, we have rebelled against God, and so on. Although these things are true, rebellion in itself is not good or bad, but rather its goodness is determined by what we're rebelling against, what you're rebelling for, and how one rebels. When this practiced complacency and learned apathy or cowering meets the reality of social injustice, that passiveness and acceptance of unjust power becomes a real problem. When the need for allyship to minorities, for civil resistance present itself, a true conflict arises, because either one must unlearn many things, or one must remain a passive onlooker of one's own and others' mistreatment at the hands of the power-hungry. Many of us suffer from having muddled a lot of inherited Victorian ideas and upbringing with living as a disciple of Jesus, mistaking habits and traditions for kingdom values, all culminating in a tendency for passive, docile, thoughtless, non-critical, compliant people. This, as you can imagine, opens a door to a flood of evils: tolerance of abuse, acceptance of systemic racism, misogyny, mistreatment of children, specifically spiritual abuse, silence in the face of the persecution of minorities, immigrants, other religions, and the list goes on. But in this world, we are not called to be compliant in the face of injustice. We are called to rebel against it. Children do this very well. They ask questions. They have a true sense of justice and fairness. They ponder the whys. They think outside boxes we have long since become accustomed to. And adults typically work very hard to snuff that fire right out of them. Some of us, in our journey of following Jesus, have to rediscover that childlike fire, to learn again, or perhaps for the very first time, to question rules, to be outraged at the mistreatment of others, and to make sure that that outrage leads to action, to have an active compassion and empathy, to think critically, to not blindly follow, to live wanting to understand, driven by curiosity, more inclined to share than accumulate, to seek connection, and to ask the why questions. There was a time for some, perhaps even just a moment for some of us, before we learned that being a Christian means sitting still, being quiet, putting your head down, being unhealthily submissive, docile, and making yourself small, nodding to everything our spiritual leaders say, terrified of rocking the boat or getting into trouble. And perhaps the few who are eager to rock the boat today don't do it to liberate others or love them better, but out of a love of drama or ego or pointless combativeness. Many of the rebels we see today are rebels with very poor causes indeed. But for some, there was a time when we dared stick out of a crowd and loved freedom. A time when the wildness of a living God whispered to us through the veil of this world, calling us in the language of adventure, stories, nature, justice, friendship, courage. Before someone bashed us down for daring to stick our head up, before someone taught us that our belonging to a community was at the mercy of our willingness to perfectly conform to its every social norm, social norms often masquerading as rites of passage to access God and salvation. Children are born with that spirit. Young people, teenagers, youth, have a fire in them which is often treated as a problem instead of seen as the very presence of conscience and of God. And most have it injured or eradicated entirely by their elders. Perhaps that should tell us something, that it is there in the beginning, not as signs of wayward children meant to be corrected, but an indication of where adults should be. Children and teenagers are told to mind their elders and follow their example, but very often adults need to be following the examples of their youngers. Jesus knew this well and told his disciples so in very clear terms. So many young people today are being led by Jesus to rebel against oppressive and hateful systems in their society. This takes an immense amount of bravery and energy. So much injustice is interlocked with other layers of injustice, which is all embedded in the layers of our identity as individuals and as a society. And so many young people are critically evaluating their belief systems or things they've been told at school, by parents, in church, by politicians, because those things are revealed to be hateful, oppressive of other people, lies, propaganda. I think many people don't realize how courageous this is, how much wisdom and kindness and humility it takes to do this. And what is often perceived as an abandoning of faith or disloyalty or simply anarchy is in fact seeking truth, a movement, a journeying, a reaching out for something better. Whether it is rebelling against family systems, an economic system, systemic racism, colonialism, imperialism, cycles of spiritual abuse, this drive should never be tempered by adult cynicism and fear. There is so much talk in many churches about the young people need guidance and they need to be led by the Spirit. But I think we'd find, if we truly saw with clearer eyes, that the Spirit is already moving and is moving in them. Much of what we may deem as misbehavior, a loss of faith, breaking with tradition, leaving the church, problematic behavior, is in fact them following the Lamb wherever he goes and being led by the Spirit. I hope that the Holy Spirit will inspire those who are following his call to persist, to not give up, to relish in his rest, in his peace, in his passion for justice. May Jesus keep moving in those whose hearts are willing and wanting, who long for better things and for a kingdom that is unlike any other.